Buddhist-Indic studies, I welcome all of you in this third plenary session of this conference, Shaktatantra. We have in fact four speakers and the name are Professor V. K. V. Shastri, Professor Shravan V. Verma, Professor Braj Sinha, Professor Shubhda Joshi, and the chairperson of this session is Professor Arvind P. Jamkhedkar. Professor Jamkhedkar is renowned and well-known archaeologist and historian. Presently, he is the chairman of ICHR. Now, I hand over this session to the chairperson. Sir.
Welcome to all, and we'll be starting our third plenary session now. There are about 4 participants. I'm requesting all the paper readers as also those who will be asking questions that we have to follow the limitations of time. So every speaker will have something about 18 to 20 minutes, and then there will be 5 or 10 minutes at the end for the question and answer session, and then for my remarks. May we start with just a moment. Professor B.V.K. Shastri.
Namaste to the dignitaries in the dais and in the audience. Arunam karuna tarangitakshim dhruta pashankusha bana chapa hastam animadibhiravrutam mayukhaihi ahamityeva vibhavaye bhavanim. And that is the crux of the theme I plan to address. The title being Osmotic Transformations and Community Adaptations of Sri Lalita of Srividya Sampradaya into Buddhistic Shaktatantra works. We had yesterday Professor Arindam Chakravarti and Dr. Rangnath endorse the integral, unbreakable connection between the Agama, Nigama and Tantra traditions. And my question yesterday was, if we break it, what happens? The answer is a disaster for the Srividya Sampradayas and understanding of the tradition. So, I would like to present a few points in a structured way. The abstract is present for you to read. I'm not going to read my abstract. I'm not going to make any presentation. The key to understand Tantra is the unity of Yoga and Sanskritam, and the name of Sanskritam is Vag Yoga, the authentic name from Patanjali. This model has broken down in the last 300 years, and what remains is some fragments. If we have got to explore the relation of Agama, Nigama, Tantra, Jyotisha and Yoga, then the starting point is Sharira. The Sharira, which comes as a part of the Shariraka Darshana, which is Brahma Mimamsa. And how do we model Sharira? What is the phala of this? The phala is Purushartha. Paramartha is a later consequence, but Purushartha is the primary goal. Therefore, Tantra is a paurusheya, a human endeavor seeking the goal of visioning the truth, satya darshana, moksha, freedom, then maximizing sukha and ananda in this sharira, here and now, ihaiva. What is the sankalpa? How do we start a tantra, a pursuit? Unlike yoga, tantra is not anushasana. Tantra is, I give you the roadmap, you drive yourself. Yoga is, examine and instruct. You follow it or not is your problem. Tantra is, I will give you the complete roadmap. You choose what you want to do. When in doubt, come back to me. This is Tantra. So, Tantra is a paurusheya prayatna which is driven by the sadhaka's desire. What do I want? If I want moksha, I go in a particular way. I seek a particular guru, the highest, the Kaula Tantras and other things. But if I want Rajya, the Samrajya, the Shakti, the wealth, and to the last end, I desire the wife of my neighbor. Even that is your sankalpa. You follow the path and take the consequences of that, the karma. So Tantra comes with a responsibility for the choice made. When tantric sadhakas make a mess up on the ishtakamana, Tantra is called bad. Okay. Should that bad decision of the sadhaka of Tantra spoil the Tantra system itself? Absolutely not. So where does Tantra, the power of Tantra come in? The power of Tantra comes as Vak Yoga. The power of the word, the power of the language, which is common across the global traditions. What does the word make happen in the world? Veda is a Vak Darshana. Tantra uses mantra, use the power of the Vak. So, the Saraswati of Veda in Samayachara and other places becomes Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, Mahasaraswati. And that we call this is the best model of our tradition. But when the osmosis takes place to the other platform of what is technically called the Avaidika Darshana of the Bauddha systems, she becomes Tara. How do we see this? The same mantra is used for Lalita and the Tara. There is a major commonality. There is a Om, there is a Hum, there is a Swaha. But instead of the Lalita, it becomes Tara. And Lalita for the Sampradayikas becomes Parabrahma Mahishi. And for the Buddhist, she becomes a Bodhisattva. It is a perception change. But both use the power of the mantra. So what are they exploring? The Shakti of the Vak, the power of the sound. So Vak Shakti in Tantra is Shakti Sadhana, instrument. Artha Sadhana, meaning. And Padartha Sadhana, to get an object. So the common practice for the Samayachara and the Buddhist is mantra sadhana. So that mantra is the sounds. And sounds become visualized in the form of an image, an icon, a diagram, a three-dimensional one, in time and space, manifestations. And that is where the cultural variations come into picture. The avaranas and all the other things. So, The commonality of using walk is there, but in Vaidika Darshana it is Vak Brahma, and in the other side it becomes Shakti Darshana. Both are sadhanas, instruments. You use the same knife to kill or cut vegetables. It's up to you, but the knife is knife. Coming to the collocation of the Vaidika traditions and the Buddhist traditions. Whether we call the Nastika Darshanas or the Astika Darshanas, both are Darshanas. And what do we see in the social condition? Gita-based Yoga Darshanas, Vyasa Darshanas predate historically the Buddhist traditions and the Jaina traditions. And when they are co-located in the same space, in the same country, the same land, same people, they draw upon the expertise of the other system. But the philosophical attire of the Vaidika systems is not acceptable to the Buddhists. Therefore, they give different names and different models. Like you have the same SIM, but you may have a Samsung or iPhone or a Redmi or something else. You have the same engine, but the top cover makes you a Honda, Accent, whatever the other brand model you prefer. So the yoga of the walk, which is Saraswati Darshana, is the key, but Saraswati Darshana in the Vaidika model leads to Vak Brahma, and on the other side it becomes Shiva Shaktya Yukto, Vagartha Viva Sampruktau, and you drop that particular thing, it becomes a dialogue. A mantra sukta is a darshana for a rishi, but for the tantra it is Shiva Shakti Samvada. To understand, to visualize darshana, one has to go through pratyahara, antaryaga and other things. For Shiva Shakti Samvada, for Shiva Shakti Darshana, unmukhatva, the internalization of the speech, that has to start. And that is the beginning of the Tantra according to Abhinava Gupta. If you don't follow that particular thing, it becomes Bahiryaga Kramaradhya. So, the land of Bharat is visualized in terms of the two Devatas. A Veda Bhumi becomes Shakti Pithas of the various, this one, right from Kamakhya to Assam, down the line, all the way. It becomes a Shiva Kshetras by Jyotirlingas. It becomes Divya Desha by Vaishnava traditions. It becomes a Rama Kshetra. It becomes Yoga Kshetra. And what is the key? The key for that comes from the Vangmayam Tapaha, which is adapted in two different traditions. The Saraswati of Srividya goes for the Vedanta, whereas Tara of Vajrayana tradition, considered as Avaidika Darshana, gives Tara as a part of the Bodhisattva, a Yogini. And how did the Jain traditions pick up this? The Jain traditions pick up Chausat Yogini and ultimately make her Padmavati and bring it to the same result. And the academia studies that as isolated pieces in the museum, whereas it's really not. It is one core tradition of the yoga. In the Vaidika Marga, as a living tradition, the Saraswati Sukta from the Veda, Chandi Patha, Durga, these are all accepted. The Yogopanishads, which come historically as a sequential thing, whether Tripura, Rahasyopanishad, all that, this one, they will say how Tantra is deeply connected with the Vedic traditions. Go to Vajrayana, they focus it on the delivering of the power, the siddhas. And what is the common ground? Where the Vedika tradition is taking this Lalita to Parabrahma Mahishi, the other side takes it to the Siddha Yogis flying and fighting each other in the South Asian, beyond India, in the Japanese, Chinese entertainment models. This is where we are heading. Saraswati becomes Neela Saraswati. And they say, we don't want to use this particular mantra, we use another thing. So I had a small note on the word Tara and Tanu Vistare. If you look at that, how do we get the word Tara? Tanu Vistare is the dhatu. Tanu is Sharira. Vistara is expansion. Expand the body and drop Vista. Tanu, Tara. So the grammarian behind this design picks the name as Tara, Akaranta Strilinga or Akaranta Pullinga, and makes it as Tare, Saptami Adhikarana. So your worship of Tara as the Shakti Adhikarana will not be clear unless you get it to the Vibhakti models of the Vyakarana. Tare as Ditiya, Prathama and Ditiya, Kartrukarma, Dvivachana will bring out the duality which will not be understood if we don't understand the Sanskrit part of that particular thing. And then Tanu, if it becomes Tara, it leads us to the next one through Tarane, from which also Tara, Tara, Avatara comes in. So when it takes to this particular thing, the A, I, U, they get added on. This is the Gushya Bhasha, the secret technique of developing the words. Tara becomes Tare, Tare becomes Ture. And how do we decode this? Ature, one who goes very fast. Kature, expecting. Hum ati katur hai, hum ati atur hai, ati utsuk hai. So these are the key things that are taught as Upadesha as a part of the Diksha. Otherwise the text is given in two parts, one in the head of the teacher, one with the open for the public. We cannot decode that without the key during the Diksha. So in short, leaving time, as the chair says, Lalita is connected deeply with Vedanta, Sarvopadishad Udghrushta, Agamaradhya, Nigamantagamya, Vagyogini Sevita. This is the tradition. If the connection between Agama, Nigama and Tantra is chopped off, the yoga is chopped off by bad modeling, inappropriate interpretations and inadequate translations, the damage will be to the understanding of the Srividya tradition and the practice, both in Hinduism and the Buddhism. So this is where the research has to take place. And the concluding part, I'm just closing that. My interest was to bring out the common ground of the mantra sounds and structures built using Samskrita Varnamala. Why Samskrita Varnamala? Because these are the Maheshwara Sutra related and the Darshana of the Shiva. It's not the Roman alphabet systems, it is not the Buddhist Sanskrit, it is the Maheshwara Sutra related one. For Sri Lalita and other comparable Buddhist Devatas. If you see the common mantra for two Devatas, the common purpose for the worship of the two Devatas, a common journey path, and a common source, then how can we differentiate Tara from Lalita except for the change in colors and the surface? And that is the osmosis that has taken place between the Hindu and the Buddhist traditions. So if we say Sattvic form of Saraswati is what I like, and I don't want the other side of the Smashana Kali or Bhadra Kali and other things, socially it may be okay, but philosophically on the higher platform, there is nothing with isolation of the three gunas. If you worship Saraswati, you have got to worship Mahalakshmi and Mahakali also. So this is the integration that comes in. And when this sadhana is given, if the sadhaka uses it in the wrong way, if the interpretations are presented differently for the society, that's not good. So this osmosis needs to be readdressed. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Professor and Acharya Shastri ji for inviting me here. And I would also like to thank his team. They've really worked tirelessly to have all of us come here and be comfortable. So thank you, everyone. My name is Shravana Borkatoki Varma. I teach at University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And the title of my paper is, I think the PowerPoint should be on now. It's Tripura Sundari, Blurring Boundaries Between How She's Seen in Kamakhya and Becoming a Digital Devi. Before I begin, I'm an ethnographer and I focus on rituals, and my area of research pivots around Shaktatantra in Assam with some overlaps in Meghalaya and Tripura. In these three eastern frontier states of India, Shaktatantra might be categorized into classical Shaktatantra and folk Shaktatantra, and I study rituals in both these spaces. For example, I looked at the practice of Kundalini Yoga in Kamakhya, the significance of blood, possession, magic, witchcraft, and so forth. In both classical and folk Shakta spaces, we find the presence of Tripura Sundari. Tripura Sundari, as David Kinsley notes, is conceptualized as a supreme deity representing the penultimate vision of enlightened consciousness, a stage of consciousness suffused with sattvic qualities, but lacking the completeness of fully enlightened consciousness represented by Kali, which is beyond all quality and form, Nirguna. In Kamakhya, she is popularly known as Shodasi and as Tripura Bala. The name Rajarajeshwari comes in a very specific ritual context, and the name Lalita is very rarely heard of in Kamakhya. In a ritual setting, the understandings of Shodasi and Rajarajeshwari in the larger context of Srividya is very fascinating, which I will return later in this paper. But before I discuss the goddess and lay out the objectives of this paper, I must take a short detour. Last month, I was at the American Academy of Religious Conference, and there was a panel on Tripura Sundari where several of the scholars here were part of. And in that session, Professor Timal Sinha alluded to mandalas. And I have his permission to quote, and he said in his paper, and I quote him directly here, "A mandala is a good metaphor for describing the intricacies of subjectivity and objectivity. We generally say that it is the center that emanates as the periphery, but we can as well say that the periphery determines the center. The myth of Durga explains the periphery recovering the center. If the center is the subject and periphery an object, they are co-constitutive. Mandala depicts harmony among subjects, but this is also a relation between subject and object, and what has been objectified is the very subject. The juxtaposition of the periphery and the center, and the relation between subject and object in Thimal Sina's paper, led me to explore Tripura Sundari ritual and question the concept of harmony and authenticity with regards to classical Shaktatantra and folk Shaktatantra. And what does authenticity and harmony look like when we add the digital realm to the mix? Is digital religion becoming the Durga as used by Thimal Sina? And if so, by currently being in the periphery, is it somehow attempting to recover the center? In other words, is the religious practice online blurring the boundaries between classical Shaktatantra and folk Shaktatantra further? With these questions, I return to my paper. So this morning, I pivot around different identifications and blurring boundaries of the goddess Shodasi and Rajarajeshwari in Kamakhya, and compare her to rapidly growing multi-billion-dollar Puja.com space, popularly known as Uber for God. Uber, like, we call it Ola or a Lyft, like that, it's the Uber for God. So let me begin with Kamakhya. Shodasi and Rajarajeshwari in Kamakhya. The confluence of classical Shaktatantra and folk Shaktatantra can be experienced in Kamakhya, especially during the Ambubachi Mela, the Deodhani festival, and the long tradition of Kumari Puja. In reference to antiquity, Kamakhya surpasses most of the shrines in larger India and definitely in eastern India. Kamakhya dates back to 8th century and continues to be one of the oldest and most revered of early seats of goddess worship. This temple complex also epitomizes the retention of many ancient practices. The Shakta Pitas in general and Kamakhya in particular represent a complex interaction or negotiation between mainstream Brahmanical or Brahmanic traditions and indigenous elements from pre-Hindu areas of India. Classical Shaktatantra, more often than not, is practiced by Shakta priests, gurus and practitioners who are initiated into the practice. The majority of them come from a long lineage of Shaktatantra priests whose ancestors were initiated members too. These groups of people, usually literate and are well versed in Sanskrit, especially Sanskrit that is used in the ritual setting. Folk Shaktatantra is generally practiced by village tantrics. They are mostly called Ojha, Kabiraj, or Bej. Sometimes they are also simply referred as Ma and Baba. These groups of people are not usually associated with an established temple. The large majority are not trained in Sanskrit, and the mantras are generally in regional languages and dialects. With regards to power dynamics, and this again is only in the context of Assam, the classical Shaktatantra priests tend to yield more power, since the popular understanding among the devotees is that these priests are trained in the correct puja vidhi, or the correct way to perform the puja. Boundaries between the classic and the folk dissolve into a harmonious relationship during the annual festival, the Ambubachi Mela and the Deodhani festival. The Ambubachi Mela is a 3-day festival celebrated annually in Kamakhya during the monsoon season that happens to fall during the Assamese month Ahar, sometime middle of June. In 2016, it was estimated that 2.5 million people attended the festival, with numbers steadily growing every year. Deodhani is a 3-day religious festival that begins after Ambubachi Mela on the last day of Shravana and continues until the second day of the month Bhadrapada, end of July, beginning August. Deodhani is derived from the Sanskrit word Devadhvani and the sound of the deity. The central feature of this festival is the possession of 9 to 15 people, all men, called the Deodha. Shodasi is the heart of Kamakhya. She resides inside the main temple along with Matangi and Kamala. Shodasi is understood to be a beautiful young girl of 16 with a red complexion. She's sometimes shown astride Shiva in union. Sometimes she's said to sit on a lotus that emerges from the navel of Shiva, who is reclining below her. Her forearms hold a noose, gourd, bow, and arrows. She's associated with Rajas Guna, the energy qualities. In Kamakya, the central ritual for Sodasi is the Kumari Puja. Reference to the word worship of Kumari Devi is found in the Devi Bhagavata Purana. The Devi Bhagavata Purana also gives different names to girls of different ages. 2-year-old is Kumari, 3-year-old is Trimurti, 4-year-old is Kalyani, 5-year-old is Rohini, and so forth. And girls above the age of 10 are not allowed in any ceremonies. In Kamakya, however, the names are different, and the Kumari Puja can be performed until 16 as long as the girl is prepubescent. The names used from 1 to 16-year-old are Sandhya, Saraswati, Tridhamurti, Kalika, Subhaga, Uma, Malini, Kubjika, Kala Sandarbha, Aparajita, Rudrani, Bhairavi, Mahalakshmi, Pitanayaka, Kshetrigna, and Ambika. The meta-narrative is that after performing the puja in the sanctum sanctorum of the temple and completing the parikrama, one must offer Kumari Puja, ideally a Brahmin girl between 5 and 10 years old, in order for the visit to the temple and the wish to be complete. But further questioning during my fieldwork, and this was my dissertation fieldwork, which was focused on Kundalini Yoga, revealed perceived benefits of Kumari Puja that corresponded to the Devi Bhagavata Purana. For example, it is believed that the worship of a 2-year-old led to extinction of misery and poverty. Puja to 5-year-old provided cure to diseases. 6-year-old destroyed enemies, and so forth. Since my fieldwork was on Kundalini Yoga, after several visits and long conversations, the name Rajarajeshwari and the esoteric meanings of the rituals appeared. The Shaktatantra initiates and the Shaktatantra sadhaka perform the Rajarajeshwari Puja during the Chaitra Navratri, sometime between March and April. It is only with this puja that my informant insisted on using the term Srividya. While Shodasi in Kamakya is kept in the exoteric, Rajarajeshwari is understood as in the realm of Kamakala Vilasa, where the meaning of Tripura Sundari is explained within the context of bodily fluids. Red being the female fluids, white the male seed, and the union of the two. Offerings of the Panchamakara or the Panchatattva ritual is central and essential, and the rituals are performed over Sri Yantra. In the Rajarajeshwari Puja ritual, the Tantric sadhaka views union between a masculine and feminine as a sacred ritual in which or by which one realizes one's cosmic identity. I found a wide range of textual references and the interpretations mapped to several different tantric texts. Broadly categorized, sadhakas who performed this ritual with their wives mostly elucidated to the Panchatattva as suggested in the Gupta Sadhana Tantra. But if the sadhaka performed the ritual with someone other than his wife, he made the references to the Yogini Tantra, Vrihadyoni Tantra, and or the Kamakya Tantra. In other words, the triangle as present in Sri Yantra is the abode of deities Kali, Tara, Bhuvaneshwari, Tripura Sundari, Bhairavi, Chinnamasta, and Dhumavati, and they are kind of placed in different parts of the triangle. The way in which Tripura Sundari inhabits the exoteric and the esoteric under two different names in Kamakya is a magnificent exemplar of the multi-layered world of Shaktatantra. Alluding back to the harmonial authenticity quotient within the classic and the folk Shaktatantra, the same Tripura Sundari in Kamakya also dwells in the space of magic. The plethora of reasons why practitioners seek a magic-based solution is discussed in several different scholarships. Most rites that call upon magic in Kamakya are performed for one or a combination of the following results: Akarshana, attraction; Vashikarna, subjugation; Stambhana, immobilization; Uchatana, eradication; Marana, liquidation; and or Vidveshana, creating dissension. When Tripura Sundari is invoked in the space of magic, for example, breaking black magic spells, attracting a desired partner, divination, snake bites, overcoming the grip of bhutas and pichachas, and so forth, the representations map to the 11th century text Vamakeshwari Mata. During the ritual, the Dasa Mahavidyas are invoked through mantras and bijas, and several tutelary deities like the Monakha Devi or Manasa Devi are called upon either by using several different smaller Sri Chakras or a very large one Sri Chakra. Bali or religious sacrifice is absolutely a must in these rituals. The sacrificial agents varies from a buffalo to a pigeon, but irrespective, blood is required. In Kamakya, in the context of magic and occult, the sophisticated meditative practices and mapping to the yogic body, as presented in the Yogini Hridaya, is blurred. Having looked at Tripura Sundari and authenticity in the context of Sudasi and Rajarajeshwari, let us now look at an entirely different space, the online religion. So now we look at Tripura Sundari in digital religion. The dot-com movement that started in the mid to late 90s had also initiated a shift in the way cultural technologies are transmitted, stored, cataloged, and disseminated. One such avenue is religion. Chris Helen had proposed distinction between religion online and online religion. Religion online was lauded for empowering its members to reform rituals and bypass traditional systems of legitimation or recognize gatekeepers and the opportunities it provided to transcend normal limits of time, space, and geography. Online religion represented how the fluid and flexible nature of the internet allowed new forms of religiosity and lived religious practice online. Within this larger space of online religion, the question of tradition, authority, and authenticity becomes a focal point, which takes on an even deeper investigative lens when we consider the actual influence the digital is making to the religion. This is called digital religion. Within the larger Hindu religious space, websites like onlinepuja.com, shubpuja.com, meclan.India, which actually provides professional services for puja room cleaning, are extremely popular. Pujas are also offered through Facebook Live, Messenger, and WhatsApp. The popularity of such pujas are not just curtailed to Hindus. We recently experienced the widely publicized teen music icon, also known as Hannah Montana or Miley Cyrus, performing Lakshmi Puja. In order for us to get a sense of the scope of pujas in cyberspace, I will just take one example, which is of shubpuja.com. Shubpuja.com, for example, was founded by Soumya Vardhan, an MBA from Imperial College of London. According to Vardhan's background provided on shubpuja.com, and I quote directly, she has previously worked in London for 7 years as a mergers and acquisitions executive at KPMG London, EY London, and Rolls-Royce UK. Vardhan picked up not just a valuable education and top corporate experience along her journey, but also collected a maze of life experiences whilst retaining her belief in ancient Hindu philosophy. Honing her focus toward this philosophy, Vardhan founded shubpuja.com in 2013. Among a list of degrees, the website also mentions advanced degree in Vedic astrology, numerology, Western and Vedic, Vastu Shastra, and Feng Shui. It's merely been 5 years since shubpuja.com had started and now has become the top Vedic spirituality-based online venture and has more than 500 Indian Vedic Brahmins and other professions as part of their team. Tapping into a $30 billion Indian spiritual market, it has extensive coverage on leading media channels and newspapers, both in India as well as abroad, like CNBC, Economic Times, Forbes, and in India we find her advertisements in Times of India, NDTV, and so forth. So borrowing a term from New York Times, Uber for God, we now will turn to the other category that features in most online puja websites, which is where Tripura Sundari will feature. Often, the online space of rituals and pujas are doubted as being a mere simulation or a reproduction of something real rather than being authentic as such. Questions are raised as to whether they are serious or flawed simulations, authentic or forged, fantasy or reality, and if they have some level of efficacy. But why are online rituals not treated by scholars with the same level of authenticity? Heinz Scheifinger investigates puja within online religion, and I quote, "Threats to the sacrality of the online puja environment can be to overcome that the ability to partake in the core practice of darshan remains in online worship. Hindu puja rituals that are performed online are not fundamentally different from traditional forms of the ritual and hence possess efficacy." With this framework, we return to Tripura Sundari online pujas. In Kamakhya, priests accept prayer requests and specific ritual requests via WhatsApp. And when you do WhatsApp, you pay directly into their accounts. The devotee makes an online payment, and the ritual is either recorded and sent via WhatsApp or is part of puja live. In the online puja space, the boundaries between the different manifestations of Tripura Sundari and how she's approached are completely blurred. For example, the esoteric and the exoteric divisions between Shodasi and Rajarajeshwari, as seen in Kamakhya, in the online puja does not exist. She's found in either the product category along with an abundance of Sri Yantra, or she's in the category of other or the puja for problems section. There's description in these sections such as that Tripura Sundari can help with a variety of doshas, problems in jobs, vashikaran, and so forth. So what does this tell us about Tripura Sundari, Srividya, and digital religion? When we keep Tripura Sundari and Srividya tradition at the center of digital religion, we find religious authority and how and why a devotee approaches her is a critical factor to consider. Religious authority has so far been overtly contested. To me, the openness to accepting rituals in a larger global diasporic platform must be considered. In this web mandala, Tripura Sundari is the subject and the periphery, is a devotee, but they are co-constituted. The web mandala powerfully illustrates the harmonial authority among different representations of Tripura Sundari. I believe a real dialogue on Srividya must acknowledge the agency and impact of digital religion. Thank you so much.
And I will request Sinha to give his presentation.
Friends, colleagues on the dais, distinguished delegates, at the very outset, I would like to express my deepest appreciation for the very dynamic, inspiring leadership in the intellectual arena provided by Honorable Vice-Chancellor Shastriji and his team. This is a very prominent occasion for us, that first time in the history of the country, and especially the religious philosophical assemblies, a focused attention is being paid to something that is very, very significant, both for the practitioners and sadhakas as well as critical scholars. At the very beginning, I would like to express also a bit of my resistance in approaching the subject matter the way I'm going to be approaching. It may be seen to be constituting some affront to the very devotional, reverential approach that we do have, which is very, very important to me as an Indian who has lived abroad for more than 4 decades, whose heart is very much in India. My approach is comparative. When I say my approach is comparative, I use phenomenological methodology. I look for conceptual congruence. I look for structural affinities. And I look for commonalities which enables us to engage in dialogue. I look at both Tantra and Kabbalah, Tantra being the Hindu expression of the mystical tradition, and Kabbalah, the corresponding Jewish expression of the mystical tradition. I look at them both as mysticism and esotericism. Let me define my terms first. By mysticism, I simply mean that effort in which there is an attempt on our part, whoever that person may be, to seek intimate, direct, intuitive experience of the reality. that cannot be communicated, that cannot be taught, that can only be suggested through metaphors and symbolic language. When I'm going to talk, I'm reflecting on the metaphors and symbolic language. Esotericism, on the other hand, doesn't claim that there is something mysterious about it. It is secret, no doubt. It is something that is hidden from the common eyes and common masses, but it is very much there communicable. And very specific way, you test the qualifications, you test the context, you test the ability of the recipient, and then you transmit whether the recipient is ready for that transmission or not. So mysticism, a very important student of mysticism, Western student, is Stephen Katz. In his very well-known work, Mysticism and Religious Traditions, makes this claim that mysticism is ultimately conservative because every mystic ultimately wants to get sanctification from the scriptural and traditional orientation to which he belongs. In a way, he sees mystic to be simply confirming what the tradition says. There is no room for innovation. There is no room for variation. There is no room actually for some specific kind of departure from the accepted paradigms. There is no unique experience, mystical experience. For him, it is nothing but the old wine in the new bottle. I tend to disagree with that. I tend to disagree with that because we are basing our observations on the information that is available to us from those who have practiced it. And when I start looking at the collaboration and I start looking at the structural affinities, then I say, well, Mr. Katz, you are wrong. Because there is something in the Jewish tradition and there is something in the Hindu tradition that I can see have significant interconnection. That's important for us because I look at religion as a universal human phenomena. So coming to the whole question of the relationship between the notion of the feminine divine as the supreme divine, supreme divinity, that's the crux of the problem of the Shaktatantra. And that's the crux of the problem in the Jewish tradition also, when there is a very interesting kind of structure within which the god and the goddess, they don't use that term, let's be very clear. The Sephiroth, that is the divine potency, the power, Shakti, has different manifestation, and it is not in this world, but it is at the level of the divinity itself. So, when I take that, then I would say, and there Shekinah appears to be the most potent expression of the divinity, which is feminine. So the most significant moment in the theosophical reformulation of, I call the divinity now androgynous, because it is the same which is both male and the female, but female has become prominent. So the most significant moment in the theosophical reformulation of the androgynous divine is the incorporation and appropriation of the feminine divine of a function and role which had hitherto been reserved for the patriarchal divinity. In both Hindu and Jewish tradition, the cosmogonic and cosmo-redemptive functions are seen to be structurally connected. As long as these two aspects of the divine operations remain exclusive or predominant prerogative of the divinity imaged through patriarchal imagery, there is very little room for the feminine divine to come to fore as an element of significance in the conceptualization of androgynous divine, which I consider to be the patriarchy turned upside down. It is interesting to note that both Tantra and Kabbalah, that particular moment of breakthrough is arrived at precisely by according the feminine divine a role in the cosmic drama that involved both elements of creation and redemption. It may be appropriate to suggest that creative and redemptive dimensions of divine operation are structurally connected. That which is author or origin of temporal existence, that is the subject to mortality and destruction, can alone confer upon the mortal beings immortal life, a life that is beyond the pale of mortality. Creative without redemptive is an anathema. And indeed, it is precisely this logic that is inevitably operative in the emergence of the feminine divine in the two mystical traditions under investigation. For the feminine aspect of the divine to be redemptive, it was necessary for it to be creative too. Feminine divine had to be imbued with the creative power as the creatrix, the universal mother, capable of bringing forth the creation, engaging in cosmogonic functions, in the case of the Tantra, without the need of the mediative father who casts his seed in the womb of the mother. In the case of Kabbalah, the supernal mother, the upper Sekina, called Bina, does need the mediative father figure, the Hokma, no doubt, but she is given the role in the creation as the creator. Not only that, she is given a role in the creative process, but that, like Sakti in the Tantra as Adya Kali, personification of the principle of time as principle of movement and dynamism in all creation, the upper Sekina in the Kabbalah stands, quote, at the edge of the seven Sephiroth, or seven primal days, emitting from herself and realizing the strength in them in the inner theogonic side of the creation, the mother of the time as well in which creation exists. This development within the Kabbalah is the most fascinating side of the story, where one discerns the process of the emergence of Upper Sekina as the feminine divine with a mythic status, imbued with creative powers, and co-eternal with the masculine divine, both together being the source of other divine emanations or substances. Thus, analogous to the emergence of Shakti as the creatrix in the Tantra, and one discerns in the Kabbalah the broader parameter of the processes by which Sekina comes to acquire a distinct, coeval masculine, no doubt, mythico-ontic status, which is a fundamental requirement of being a redeemer too. I suggest this capacity that the feminine divinity has is actually at the source of the acknowledgement of the redemptive power. For Kabbalists, the higher Sekina, which is identified as the source of life and the world to come, which is the true dimension of bliss in Kabbalah, is also called return. For everything that began in it returns to it at the end, when its energy has been fully consumed. Accordingly, the upper Sekina is explicitly described as the realm of redemption. Thus, one can see the significant conceptual congruence that the Mother Goddess is not only the creator, but she is also the redeemer. Within the Kabbalistic framework, employment of anthropomorphic symbolism to connote the ontic structure of divine reality plays an important role in conceiving and articulating the androgynies of the divine reality. This anthropomorphic conception, however, while certainly employs the imagery of the Adam Kadmon, and I'm sorry I don't have that imagery, but it's a wonderful imagery that people from the Indian background can relate to. This primal person, Adam Kadmon. This primal person is none other than the Adi Purusha. That's a very interesting concept. The primal person to portray the revealed God consisting of the 10 Sephiroth, potencies, divine potencies. At the same time also breaks away from the patriarchal imagery by employing powerful sexual imagery of the male and female relationships to portray the life of the divine. It is in this, as we may recall, God argues the contemplative character of the Kabbalah. Let me say, however, a closer examination of the Kabbalistic approach suggests that sexual terms are employed to outline processes of flowing and receiving the divine influences in the world of emanation, which ultimately is constituted by 10 divine substances and powers called Sephiroth, which together constitute the revealed God, transcendent God. They have the concept of the Ein Sof exactly like Brahman, the one without the end, both in terms of time and no doubt, but also without purpose. And for this transmission and reception of the divine influence to be feasible on the model of a sexual symbolism, one would assume there to be fixity about the general characterization of the gender characterization of each of the Sephiroth. While there may be certain fixity in the mythic characterization of each of the Sephirah, there is also a dialectical understanding whereby each Sephirah is in turn, each Sephirah, each entity, divine entity, is in turn understood to be both male and female. Thus, the same Sephirah, which can be characterized with respect to the source above as female, in turn also characterized as male with respect to the respectable below. Although this king, Bina, which is Shekinah, is called king, is concerned from all, is a spiritual being, it is nevertheless female in relationship to the supernal point Hokmah, which is concealed from all. And even though it is female, it is male in relation to the lower king, and so on and so forth. It may also be noted that this transgenderization applies not only to the lower Sephirah, but also to the very first Sephirah, the Keter, Iswara in our language, which is also called crown, a designation primarily reserved in the Kabbalistic circles for the lowest Sephirah, the Shekinah, the Kali, which is represented as a protruding part of the divine phallus. It will further, I will further comment on this whole notion of the crown imagery later. Structurally and phenomenologically, in both the traditions, there is a requirement of the mystic to effect ontic and mythical reconciliation of the feminine divine with the masculine divine. For it is precisely their separation that has caused the fiery rays to come into being that is devouring the sinful world. In the case of Tantric Kali, Shakti separated from Shiva is the epitome of the violent upsurge that can only be stilled by arousal in her, the sublime urge of erotic fulfillment. This accounts for all too well-known imagery of Shiva and Shakti in various representations of Kali or one or other of her manifestations engaged in the act of copulation, with Shiva lying on the ground and the feminine divine presented as the dynamic and active principle in a dominant role in this cosmic copulation, which is symbolic of rechanneling of feminine energy into creative mode. This imagery of Shakti and Shiva, reconciled in the erotic creative act, is replicated in the Joharic understanding of Shekinah's relationship with Tiferet, the power of the holiness. The tree of death, that is Shekinah, like the Kali, it symbolizes disjunction between Shekinah and the forces of the holiness, symbolized in the Kabbalistic tradition by Sephirah Tiferet, the upper god. This separation between the Shekinah and Tiferet is a function of Shekinah having come in contact with the other world, the demonic world. Remember the Kali story, who by its very nature seeks to act as a force of death and destruction. Analogous to the tantric framework of divine copulation of Shiva and Shakti, what is required here is that Shekinah be specifically united in intercourse with Tiferet, and to be linked thereby through the power of the influence that she receives in intercourse to the forces of the chariot and the angels that are below. It is precisely the separation of the feminine and masculine in the divine that has caused this state of the fall of this humanity. Humanity finds itself. Hence the righteous must engage in creative imagination, in our language meditation, involving meditation, which visualizes masculine and the feminine not as two separate entities, but as one united being. The whole thrust of the imagery of divine copulation in both Tantra and Kabbalah is precisely restoration of the original union of the supernal mother and the supernal father engaged in cosmic creation, imaginatively and symbolically. The masculine and feminine divine must be brought together in one imagery which does not see them as two entities with separate ontological status. This is the task of the mystic in both the traditions, engaged in the creative, meditative imagination. Within the Hindu tradition, this involves symbolism of Linga and Yoni as one unified imagery, as well as images of Shiva and Shakti, divine as divine couple. There is also famous imagery of Shiva as the Ardhanarishwara, the half-female and female lord. In the Tantra, this symbolism is further accentuated by giving Shakti a dominant role in divine copulation and thereby asserting the supremacy of feminine divine. Do I have 5 minutes, sir? 2 minutes? Yeah, okay, we will take that. The important note, so I have a section on the Sri Chakra, and which you're so familiar with. I will skip that completely. Just I want to emphasize here that just as in the Hindu tradition, we have these mechanisms of the meditation, whereby this reconciliation of the masculine and feminine takes place through the prominence of the feminine, so also Kabbalah suggests the same method. In the context of Kabbalah, sexual imagery involved in imaginative visualization also involves a process of reconciliation of the masculine and feminine divine in a manner that seems to obliterate their ontic duality. In the Kabbalah, the Shekinah as a feminine potency of the divine is to be visualized not as a separate entity, but like the Linga and the Yoni together, one with the divine phallus. Indeed, in this visual encounter, the Shekinah is the protruding aspect of the divine phallus, the corona of the penis. It is true that like the Yoni, Tantra, Johar in several places has described in graphic details the feminine genitalia of the divine persona. However, the dominant imagery here is the symbolization of Shekinah in the corona of the divine phallus, the corona being the crown that the phallus wears. In this mystical vision, the crown is a symbol of divine power and glory, which belongs to Shekinah, the feminine dimension of the divine. In according Shekinah, this empowering function, by making it the crown of the phallus, a certain emasculation of the divine phallus has taken place. The power and the glory does not belong to the masculine, but to the feminine divine, with the object of mystic imaginative visualization. In the complex gender symbolism of the Theosophical Kabbalah, as the corona of the phallus corresponds to the feminine aspect of the goddess Shekinah, the act of crowning must be viewed as feminization of the divine. The chloric examination, one finds that there is discernible, intriguing, and refreshingly subversive theological stance of the androgynous divine in both Tantra and Kabbalah that constitutes a challenge to the conceptual framework of Kant's thesis. Both mystical traditions, in somewhat analogous fashion, an androgynous divine as a counterpoise to the traditional patriarchal divine imagery. Their conceptualization of androgynous divine involves two related motives. In both the motives, there is a tendency to affirm the supreme divinity in the form of the feminine, to sanctify the masculine. This indeed is not conservatism, it is an innovation of a significant kind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hans. May I now request Professor Shubhada Joshi to give her presentation.
Namo Namaha. Good morning to one and all. At the outset, my sincere thanks to Vice Chancellor Professor Yagneshwar Shastri for giving me opportunity to speak in the midst of scholars. My topic is Marxist method, Tantra, and its critique. Many thinkers in India have written on history of Indian philosophy using Marxist method like Dharmananda Kosambi, Damodar Kosambi, then Comrade Dange, Rosa Deshpande, Bani Deshpande, Sara Gadgir, that is S.R. Gadgir, Sardesai. And one important name amongst these scholars, and of course, many professors from JNU like Professor Suman Gupta, and one important name amongst these scholars who used Marxian method to interpret Indian philosophy is senior Professor Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay, who was professor of history, written many books like Lokayata, What is Dead and What is Living in Indian Philosophy. It was this method which was used by scholars very effectively during the period where Marxism was a glittering star, and the works were taken seriously and studied seriously in the socialist countries. There are two ways one can look at this. One can take it seriously and then try to look at Indian philosophy. Rather than looking at Indian philosophy as history of philosophy, maybe history of thoughts, history of ideas, or one may neglect it completely. Both approaches, but I am following the first one, taking it seriously and then trying to look at it critically. Historical materialism, which is the offshoot of dialectical materialism, applied to history of ideas. This is the general framework of the Marxist thinkers. Dialectical materialism, as we know all, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. The result of thesis, antithesis, synthesis is the outcome of 5 stages through which history has developed, is argued by Marx and is accepted by the Marxist thinkers. And the 5 stages are
primitivism, where society was classless, complete absence of social institutions like marriage, family, education, absence of private property, no governance, etc. Primitivism followed by a class-divided society, again of the primitive type, but where the means of productions were introduced and there were owners of means of productions, and then there were those who did not have it. So it was the beginning of a class-divided society. Followed by feudalism, capitalism, and it will culminate. The future is again a classless society. Now this is a very generalized position I am presenting before, because I have to cover it, both the position and its critique. The monumental work which is undertaken by the Marxist thinkers, interpreting Vedas, Upanishads, then coming to Vedanta, and at the same time also Sankhya and Tantra. For the Marxist thinkers, Sankhya is originally very close to Tantra, where Vedanta is superimposed on it at a later position. I'm not going to touch that part of it. And all Marxist thinkers argue that if we refer to Vedas, Upanishads and
the agamas of Tantra, they are not the philosophy of intelligentsia or the philosophy which speaks about the higher goals of human life, but it is a stark primitive materialism where society is classless and society is pursuing mere material benefits. This argument of primitivism is used as a tool along with using a comparative method of the study of anthropologists and the scholars, and the leading one which is quoted very often is Fraser, Golden Bough, very popular book by Fraser, where the tribal primitive societies all over the world are studied, and there he had shown that how these tribal primitives are far away from any philosophization, any abstraction, awareness of any higher goals rather than the pure stark materialism. So in the works such as Lokayata and What is Dead and What is Living, it is this methodology which is applied to interpret Tantra. Now, on the one hand, the scholars argue for primitivism or the Vedas and Upanishads, saying that if these are the creations of some 5,000 years back, where society was absolutely primitive, and then interpret the philosophy. I'm not going to touch that part. When it comes to Tantra, the difficulty is that what exactly is the period of the original agamas of Tantra? But again, I'm not going to touch that particular thing. For the sake of their argumentation and showing that this is a philosophy or these are the agamas written in the ancient period, and therefore it's a clear reflection of primitivism. And again, there is a bifurcation done by almost all Marxist thinkers that Vedic society is pastoral, Vedic society is patriarchal, and Indus civilization is matriarchal, and Indus civilization is agrarian. And Indus civilization is being matriarchal, agrarian, female principle is given more importance, whereas Vedic society being patriarchal, pastoral, the male principle is given importance, and therefore the philosophy is developed accordingly. The origin of Tantra might have been in the Indus civilization, where female polarity is important. Primitive materialism is shown where Tantra practices are used in both ways, as it has been said on this platform also, that may be for elevation, maybe for material prosperity. The meaning which is taken while dealing with the basic tenets of Tantra by these Marxist thinkers is given in the way that it deals with very, very simple, imitative, agrarian, fertility, magical practices. And again, for that, Not only Golden Bow, I'm just quoting one, but there are many who have given such fertility rituals, and such rituals, the similarity is shown between Tantra and the fertility rituals. The point here is that Panchamakara sadhana is again used to indicate that again how primitive the faith was. The tribes of even contemporary India are studied, especially by Professor Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay. That is the tribes of almost the modern period, of the northern part of India, northeast of India. And again, what is indicated is, look, these primitive tribes also, they are using fertility magic for their agriculture, and then they are also completely ignorant about any higher goals, and look at the similarity between the practices. I'm not going to illustrate all these points, but what is important is there are many anthropologists who have argued that not all primitives are completely, absolutely ignorant of any idea of what can be called the higher goal, or what can be termed as religious ideas and abstraction. The anthropologists who have studied not only the primitive existing tribes and also the contemporary tribals from India have indicated that these tribes, when they are worshipping stones, when they are worshipping natural events, natural phenomena, they also have some idea of abstraction and divinity. The point here is that the same arguments are used for the Vedics and the same arguments are used for the Tantrics. When it is about the using of the male and the female polarities together, the Marxist thinkers argue that look at the perspective. It reflects the perspective of the primitivism where even marriage was institution of marriage was absent. The whole analysis of such methodology where the male-female polarity is taken and studied is done with all seriousness by Professor Sadashiv Ambadas Dange, who was a professor of Sanskrit in Mumbai University. Same name, Sadashiv Ambadas Dange, Comrade Dange, but he was a professor of Sanskrit. And what he has said here is that this is very important and it applies to both the Vedic as well as the Tantric interpretation of Marxist thinkers, how the seers were looking at it. Professor Dange writes, the seer visualized the working of the cosmos, that is the Brahmanda, and the seers were conscious of the fact that they themselves are the divinity, the knower of the working of the entire cosmos. Now, this he is writing about the interpretation of the Vedic, which is done by, he is not referring to the Marxist thinkers, but others who are looking at the male-female polarity which is used as Mithuna, and the whole Vedic practices were interpreted that way. He's giving a critique of it and says that the seer is looking at it himself as divinity and is aware of the functioning of Brahmanda. Isn't it the same in the philosophy of Pinda Brahmandavada, where one is aware of one's divinity and one is aware of one's own, not only aware, but one really has experienced the universe and what is oneself, the replica one is of the cosmos. It's very difficult to speak for the realized soul, because the realized soul, whichever way speaks, the interpretation is needed, and the unrealized is not able to speak because the unrealized doesn't have the experience. What is very important is that when the realized soul speaks, as it is already said, the use of imagery is required. Symbolism becomes very essential part, and the symbolism which is understood, which can establish a rapport with the learners, such imagery is used, such symbolism is used, and therefore to indicate creation, the best familiar imagery is used. And this is how interpreting symbols becomes a very important part in Tantra. There are many Indian thinkers who have written on interpreting symbols. Sri Aurobindo is one. Also, Professor R.D. Ranade, who has interpreted symbols, is another. The whole Marxian method is looking at the imagery and the symbols without going into the details. I'll give further point, and that is, in the rituals, Professor Dange says, being one with the divine speech, the sage has a control of the cosmic activity, and it is this control over the cosmic activity through divine speech is actually the power of mantra. This is how one can even look at mantra. Now, if with this we look at mantra, diksha, guru, yantra, and the qualities which are necessary for the guru and the qualities which are necessary for sadhaka, we realize that the available agamas of the Tantra literature and all available agamas of Tantra literature do cover these areas, like the guru, diksha, mantra, yantra, and sadhaka, and the part of sadhana. Well, the known beginning of human history might have been somewhere in primitive stages. But it doesn't mean that the known literature of human civilization, which is considered as philosophical literature, is necessarily reflecting entirely primitivism. Some glimpses, but that also one has to really find out. I am reminded of one use of scientific method. The use of scientific method says that when you generalize, you also have to put forward the criteria for falsification. One important thing with the writings of Marxist thinkers is that they generalize in such a way that they think that history all over the world has progressed only following the dialectical materialism or historical materialism. There is a scholar named Malvin Rader who writes about Marxist methodology. And very satirically, Malvin Rader writes that in the socialist countries, where the Marxist scholars are conducting experiments in the scientific laboratories in the field of natural sciences, their experiments follow the rules of dialectical materialism rather than the factual analysis. A Marxist method, then one may think that then why should one think so seriously about Marxist method? Because I'm not putting before you the nuances with which the Marxists argue. Take a simple thing like Kundalini, the serpent power, and the interpretation of the serpent power in the Marxist methodology will go back to the fertility rituals and agrarian practices, denying that this is the dormant power within the human body which is playing important role. My reply to this critique is redundant in the august audience because since yesterday we have been listening to contribution of Tantra and some important aspects of Tantra, and not only important aspect, the nuances in the aspect of Tantra, practices of Tantra, Srividya, and the text analysis and the textual study. It is true that in the Indian universities, there are hardly occasions where people think very seriously about Tantra. And therefore, there are two reasons for this. One reason is that the secrecy which is maintained. And second is the imagery and the language which is used in the Tantra. There are certain pockets in India where Tantra is studied, practiced. But apart from one or two centers where Tantra is studied, other Indian universities do focus on all other schools, like Vedic schools, like Shramana schools, like Lokayata. But the contribution of Tantra remains ignored. And Tantra has contributed tremendously even in the thought processes. When it comes to Abhinav Gupta and Anandavardhana, Dhvanyaloka Lochana, the contribution becomes very significant. But to this, the Marxist thinkers will say, but this is of much later period. But the beautiful part of it, or rather the paradoxical part of it, is that when they have to give their own thesis, and if they find any supporting position even within the writings of Abhinav Gupta, they will not hesitate quoting Abhinav Gupta. But when it comes to contrary the position, then when it is put forward that Abhinav Gupta says so, then they will say, oh, it is later position. Then why is it that I'm putting it before you? Even though I said that Marxism was a glittering star, and then this was very, very in thing in the academia, even today, Marxist thinkers do talk about such things. And last sentence. And people are taken by such arguments. And therefore, what I feel is that, and I'm very happy that the entire Uttara Paksha, which is already done here, yesterday, it will be done today also, afternoon sessions, and it will be done tomorrow also. I thought that I must give some contrary position as Purva Paksha, which I took seriously during 80s, 85s. And when I came to Abhinav Gupta and Dvanyaloka and Dvanyalochana and this thing, I tried to introduce these things in the university syllabus. At Bombay University, students of philosophy are doing it, and Professor Zamkhedkar also knows about it. And therefore, I thought, let me take this opportunity to put it before you. Thank you very much.
Which were here. I must mention about Braj Sinha's very novel and very interesting comparison between the patriarchy turned upside down, as it is called in the Jewish tradition and the Hindu tradition. Then there was another paper that was by Professor Shravana, who dealt with the classical and the folk level, you can say, Tantra philosophy as also the ritual. The last one, the third one was about, and it should be useful for, especially for those who study comparative Buddhism and Hinduism, that is the unity which is there, or concordance which is there, similarities which are there between the Buddhist tantras and the Hindu tantras, or the classical tantras. The last one was, of course, more close to my, you can say, area of thinking, and that was, as its application is there in the history. That is of the Marxist interpretation of the Indian history itself through the 5 stages or the 6 stages which have been proposed by D.D. Kosambi. There is a lot of literature which is coming in vernacular also. In Marathi recently there was a book by one Dr. Deshmukh on the rise of the Bhakti and Tantra in the late medieval period or the medieval period. So all these were really very interesting, and in case there are some questions, they are welcome. But we have finished the time, so only 5 minutes I will allow for these questions and answers. So please.
Thank you so much, all of you. Beginning with Professor Sinha, this very creative engagement with Tantra and Sakina. Now, what kind of further invitations are there? For example, in the Tantra tradition, we have this engagement of Saundarya Lahari, and one wonders whether there are similar kind of engagement with Sakina. But also in Kabbalah, there is a very deep journey of what is called as hibernation of God. One wonders then, how do we look at the whole idea of the darkness in both Tantra and Sakina, and then the idea of the gunas. One way of looking at Tantra is also a new way of engagement with gunas, and whether one also finds it in the Jewish tradition. But in terms of methodology, you begin with phenomenology, which has been mainly objectivistic. But the kind of comparative approach you are suggesting also calls for a transformation of phenomenological method. I would like to suggest whether you can embrace also the transformation of the phenomenological in the direction of a transpositional phenomenology. My quick queries to other speakers, Dr. Sarvana, very interesting, but the online and the real, the online self, for example, also gives a new possibility of self-realization. So one wonders then, for example, whether in terms of sacrifice. Now, in the reality, if you are in Guwahati in Kamakhya temple, you may not offer a critique of sacrifice. But in the online, whether there is a possibility of a critique of sacrifice, thus transforming the dominant religion. My final query to Professor Joshi is that very interesting, but central to Marxist approach is also critique of division of labor. Now, in that way, that how the critique of division of labor can be embraced in a way of critique of division of labor of both class and gender. It is in that context whether Tantra constitutes an alternative division of labor. And therefore, the whole idea of critique of political economy from Marxism in Tantra, whether we can find suggestion of an alternative economy, for example, moral economy, and possibility a moral economy of desire. Thank you. Moral economy of desire, you know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, thank you very much for your comments. I greatly appreciate some of the rectification you suggest. Three very quick comments. There is a lot more to be done, and there is tremendous opportunity for us to do in terms of comparative studies involving Hindu and Jewish traditions. I suggest that for two reasons. One is, most importantly, these are the two, what I call paradigmatic religion of the world. In the Eastern world, you take the Indian context, and it is a Vedic tradition, and beyond that, you can talk about Jainism and Buddhism and Sikhism and whatnot. And certainly when you go to East Asia, you would see that in some significant ways, Confucianism and Taoism has been so much integrated with Buddhism. So that's one side of the story, and the side of the story is that Judaism is starting with the Judaism, you have Christianity, and then you have Islam. So these are the mother cultures and mother religious civilizations that I want to look at comparatively. Just to give you quick examples, it is a very simple snapshot of what I'm trying to do. I mentioned the concept of the Ein Sof. You talked about the darkness of the God. But that darkness is of a different kind. It is the darkness of the bewilderment of the light. When you come into the sun, you can't see anything. So that's the idea. Ein Sof, you do look at it, it is a remarkable conception. It's coming so close to the Hindu notion of the Brahman, coming so close to that. And then even the second, I just mentioned one, it is so important for us to remember various dimensions of the Srividya. One of them so important is the matrikas, the language, the speech, and the sphota. It is right there in the Jewish tradition. Shekinah herself is the mother of the Hebrew alphabets. And just as we play the mysticism of the alphabets, that is also very important. Also, mysticism of the number, especially the 9 and 3 and so on and so forth. Actually, I did not have that imagery of the Adam Kadmo. You would recognize the triangle all over, like the Sri Yantra triangle all over. So, and yesterday a question was asked about this triad. Triad is very simple. It is so simple that we don't think of it. The triad is very simple. All reality arise, all reality stay, and all reality come to end. That's the story of the civilization. That's the story of individual quest. That's the story of the religious traditions. So triad is a very powerful universal symbol. If you look, I look at the cross and mystical, you see the triad right there. You look at the Star David, and you see the triad right there. So there are a lot of things that can be done. Phenomenological method, I use that as a comparative processes involving the religious studies. And you would have recognized that this phenomenology is already a transformational phenomenology. It's not sticking with the Husserlian sense of the phenomenology. So I think I greatly appreciate your comments. I think there is a lot of opportunity for us to do. It is very important that we start with the traditions that we are very familiar with. That's where our strength is. But it is also important that we reach out and engage the other in the dialogue, because without that dialogue, there is no growth of thought. Thank you so much.
Do you consider Rajneesh as a tantric?
Well, is that directed to me? Yeah. I have not read Rajneesh. I have heard of his works, and honestly, I have not read Rajneesh. So I will not comment on that. But if you think he's a tantric, he should be a tantric. I don't know about that. I did say I made my comments at the very beginning. I'm looking at Tantra and the Kabbalah as mysticism as well as esotericism. If there is an element, and mysticism I define very simply, and that may not be acceptable to you, sir, but that's where there is inner urge or the quest for the search for the identification with the supreme or the transcendent, which cannot be communicated in the language that we are expressing. Then we are using the language of the metaphors and symbols. And I don't think there is anyone who will doubt the fact that mysticism does involve the language of the metaphors and the symbols. So that's, but on the other hand, you have Srividya. On the other hand, you also have internal history of the Kabbalah, where the masters sit with the disciple and they do explain step by step. They go through what needs to be done and what will be the result of that. And that's not mysticism, that's esotericism, because it is very clearly understood what are the steps, what are the sequences, and what are the consequences. So I do not know anything about that.
I absolutely want to ask you something.
Professor Shastri, I also have a
Question for Professor Joshi. Let's start with Professor Shastri. You centralized the concept of Vag Yoga, word yoga, okay, speech yoga, and from the vantage point of most Western practitioners of yoga, you see, this seems to be bizarrely unnecessary. You see, when you go into a Hindu temple, it's very noisy. Whereas you see, when they go to a Vipassana retreat or so, what they have to practice is silence. And indeed, the very first definition of yoga in the Katha Upanishad says yoga, very simply, is closing the senses and stilling the mind. Now, all this mantra business that you talk about is very interesting, but people could wonder why it is necessary. What's the use of it? Hasn't Indian culture made an enormous detour when at the beginning already it had found that it is all very simple? And my second question is for Professor Joshi. As an honorary member of the Indian Society for Ex-Communists, the Kumarila Bhatta Samiti, I have listened very attentively, and I wonder, after you enumerate all these Brahmins, like Dange, like Chattopadhyay, like founder M.N. Roy, and so on, isn't there something naturally interested in novelties like Marxism within the Brahminical tradition? For example, you see, whereas all these devotional temple worship is going on, there have been strong atheist traditions within Brahminism. There has been a skeptical view of the gods within Mimamsa and so on. Therefore, isn't it natural that they jumped out of the Indian devotional tradition and approached Marxism?
Thank you, Professor Elst, for asking that question. Yoga is not a word with one single meaning. Yoga is having a plurality of meanings and plurality of definitions and multiple goals. Therefore, when we deal or discuss yoga, we need to be very specific and say, what am I looking for, why I am looking for, and how I am looking for, and more important, what kind of a language I am using for. if I am discussing engineering, I should be speaking the language of the formulae, maths, drawing. I cannot use the language of biology or the media. In the same way, if we are talking about yoga, we should speak the right language of yoga, and within that, if you are looking for Raja Yoga, what's the kind of technical language used? The hermeneutic problem, the pedagogic problem that I am coming across many of these discussions is a mix-up of the social language usage with the technical language. For example, you said temple, Hinduism, noise, vipassana, silence. The language used is not the same. It is a mix-up of what we call a society, that is samaj, itihas, history, abhyas, current practices, in engaging what is a deeply philosophical issue called the deliberation in the Shastras. In the media, it would be called, you discuss the top issue of the constitution on what is going on the street and blame the chair where somebody is making a mistake. So we need to be very clear how we are addressing the issue. To the specific case of this walk yoga, the power of language is what is being explored in Tantra and Buddhism and the Vedic tradition. If you are able to see the language, see your saying, walk darshana, the language used to describe it is something technical. If you are doing the viniyoga, the application of the walk, it is different. So, jape viniyoga is different from mantra darshana. If the translation and the presentation has made a mess of it, it's a hermeneutic error, and it is not the practitioner, it is the teacher and the professor who validates it, they need to be questioned. This is the error of the teachers, not of the system. So walk yoga, when Sanskrit, which is anchored to today to the Paninian text Ashtadhyayi, deals with 60% as the chandas, Vak Darshanam, Mantra Darshanam, and that 40% is used to describe the literature, both not covering the Guhya Bhasha, the Sandhya Bhasha, the Devayoni Bhasha, the technicalities. We miss the essence of the text. And this has been happening in translations, in practice for several years. And when the question is raised, mixing up itihas, samaj and abhyas with tattva shastra, these questions do come up. And I would just say one thing, that what are you looking for? Kim apekshitam. Say that. Instead of asking kim etat. What is that is a different question than what I am looking for. I hope I have answered that question. Thank you.
Actually, the dialogue which has been going on has been quite interesting. And Professor Shravana and also Professor Joshi will have to answer these things. But I think we will rather do these when we meet for a cup of tea or at the time of our lunch. Because then there is another program just to start. So because of these limitations, I would like to conclude. I thank all the presenters, as also those persons who have listened to carefully and also raised questions. Thank you very much.